So again, my name is Leah Finlayson. I'm the Director of Victim Services, and I've been at SeniorLAW Center since 2016. Prior to that, I was the managing attorney at the North Penn Legal Services, and thanks for all the workers that I used to work with who are in the room. I wish I could actually see your faces and talk to you, but we'll move forward. So for 16 years, I worked as a plan member organization, did legal aid work just like many of you, and we took everything under the, under the sun. We did have some seniors who were we were representing, especially in bankruptcy cases. So I've done family law cases, custody cases, guardianship cases, landlord-tenant, PFAs, and so we sort of run the gamut of lots of things that we were doing. So that just gives you a little background to see where I'm coming from, because I know from practical reasons, the things that are coming through your door. So I'm gonna just have Brendan introduce himself, and then we're gonna get started with.
Hey, thank you, Leah.
Meet myself. So I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I was still getting a lot of feedback. I don't know if you guys are getting echoing now from me. Are you getting echoes, or you had that before when you were speaking? Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Corbalis. I'm the Assistant Director of Victim Services at SeniorLAW Center. I work as a team with Leah and our victim service attorneys. We represent Pennsylvania 16 and older. We have offices in Bucks, Chester, Delaware, and Montgomery counties. And many of our cases deal with protection from abuse orders, but we also handle things like quiet title, ejectment actions, fraud, sometimes contract claims. As long as the issue is arising out of financial exploitation or other abuse, then our funding allows us to go ahead and provide direct representation. We do a lot of advice, and we do outreach and training throughout the counties. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, so hopefully your sound improves, and is my sound okay, hopefully? All right, so the reason we want to introduce ourselves is because we're not a plan member. So when I worked at North Penn, I really hadn't heard of SeniorLAW Center and what it does. So what Brendan said is our main office is in Philadelphia, and now we have some county offices. We also have, again, a SeniorLAW helpline where we can help any senior in Pennsylvania 60 or older. Generally, we're giving advice or brief service. So you get, again, any senior in your county that maybe you may not be able to represent or advise because of income restrictions, we may be able to assist them at least with some guidance and some advice. So, obviously our services are all free. So please encourage them to call us. Again, we're the largest provider of legal services in Pennsylvania. We do a lot of outreach in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. I actually love going to senior centers and talking to seniors about avoiding financial exploitation and scams. We often have very rowdy crowds, so they're often very fun to be with. We've been in existence for over 40 years, and we hope to continue for a long time. Unfortunately, because of some of the statistics I'm going to go through, we probably will be. So let's talk about seniors in Pennsylvania. So this estimate is probably low, but there's 2.8 million seniors in Pennsylvania. We are the 5th largest state with seniors. 1 in 4 Pennsylvanians are seniors, and 24.2% of all Pennsylvania households have 1 or more seniors. So I looked at the stat just the other day. In 2035, there will be 78 million people 65 or older, compared to 76 million of adults under 18. So that's a pretty big shift in terms of the aging population. Again, some of the statistics are 65 or older, but our office, again, as Brendan had said, helps people who are 60 and older. And I just briefly acknowledge Water Abuse Day that was on Monday. Again, it became sort of an International Remembrance Day back in 2011. They've indicated that there will be 2 billion seniors probably by the year 2050. And if what we're seeing in terms of financial exploitation and fraud is, they're saying that 320 million of those seniors are going to be victims. So that's a lot of victims. Unfortunately, from our work, we know that the number of victims is increasing, especially with COVID-19. So what types of cases are we seeing? You know, I know when I worked for Legal Aid, obviously a lot of the things that we were doing were protection from abuse cases. Although I will say that when I worked at Legal Aid, I did not ever represent a senior in a PFA. I'm not quite sure where that was. And in our counties, we aren't seeing a lot of cases, though we're starting to make good partnerships with our counties. And so we are taking those cases. If you are a legal aid office in those counties and need assistance with some of those cases, we can certainly take them. Obviously, we're seeing a combination of sexual abuse, physical abuse, and financial exploitation, which has been extremely exploding in the last several years. And Brendan's going to talk a lot about what kind of work we do with the financial exploitation aspects of it. So these statistics are probably pretty low, but they say that essentially 1 in 44 cases is ever reported. So there's 43 other cases that never come to light. You know, speaking to the seniors that we're working with, again, it's probably even worse than that because of various reasons why seniors don't report. So it really is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're seeing in terms of elder abuse and financial exploitation. So, you know, obviously a lot of you have already been working with younger people who are facing either physical abuse or emotional abuse or financial exploitation, but how's it different for senior victims? So, you know, it's true that some of these things may cross over from younger victims to older victims, but we find that seniors are less likely to seek help from outsiders. They obviously often will be assisted by or dependent on the abuser for caregiving issues. A lot of the adult children may discourage them from taking any action. Either it's because it's another adult child or a spouse of many years that may be doing the abuse. And so they're getting it from there. A big threat that abusers have is they're going to place the senior in a nursing home. So certainly that's something in play that you won't see with the younger victim. And so I'm not going to go through all these things, but there are lots of different issues that our seniors are facing that you have to think about when you are representing someone and the different issues that they're tackled with when they make decisions about moving forward with a protection order. I know Brendan just came back from a hearing today where the seniors go back and forth about whether they want to pursue a final protection order just because it's their son and they are still very worried about him. They don't want him to go to jail, even though he's done things that are very abusive and criminal. And so these are some of the things that we're thinking about when we're pursuing cases in court. So not only do the seniors have these types of issues that they're worried about, now we also have COVID-19, which is stressful for all of us. And Kelly and I were just talking about Zoom fatigue with the number of things that we're doing and how difficult it is just to get through every day when you're not exactly even sure what day it is. So according to the CDC, older adults 65 or older are at higher risk for severe illness, which we all sort of know. Seniors aged 80 or older are dying at a rate of 5 times the average rate. And some of the statistics are saying that about 80% of the deaths in the United States are seniors 65 and older. So when we're thinking about cases and advocating, we know that just any senior trying to get help, it's difficult for them even to go outside because they don't know what's going on in terms of what their safety is. One of the other issues that we're sort of dealing with is they may have an abuser in their household and the abuser's not adhering to social distancing rules. Again, they're going out, they're going and having parties with other people or going and getting into trouble, and they're coming back, which obviously affects the risk of the senior getting infected. In terms of reporting, senior centers are no longer available for support and outlets. You know, again, as I said, we do a lot of outreaches to senior centers, and they're very packed all the time with seniors, and that's a really great avenue for them, especially if there's violence in their home. It's one way to get them to escape the violence or get some adults or other people that they trust to try to report to. So those agencies are limited. For instance, we're obviously all working remotely, and so our ability to help someone in person is very limited. So that's a concern. So again, as I'm going through this, if there are any challenges that your office is seeing that I haven't already sort of identified, please feel free to put them in the chat so we can share that with others. The courts were closed for a long period of time, and so for our office, we are actually representing landlords. So many of our seniors in Philadelphia own buildings, or they bring someone in. So if the seniors are in the home, bringing in a tenant, obviously there was a moratorium on eviction. So obviously that's great for all our senior tenants, but it's not good for those who are the landlords or someone who needs to eject an abuser out of the home. So as you know, there has to be physical abuse, but with elder abuse, sometimes it's physical abuse, sometimes it's emotional abuse. You know, it's a lot of things going on, and sometimes in the situation, either there's not the relationship that you need in order to obtain a PFA, or there's not any physical abuse or threats in order to get a PFA, but there's still issues going on in the home where the abuser is ridiculing or cursing at the senior, and it's not a good situation. And again, you know, APS isn't working full time. They're not coming out. We have lots of cases where we need to try to assess the senior's capacity, and it's hard for us to do over the phone, and it's hard for us to figure out how to address someone's safety when the investigators are only limiting their calls in terms of in-person appointments to serious bodily injury and physical abuse. And so, you know, again, we don't have that other assistance for us in terms of dealing with and identifying seniors who are being abused. And then the last thing, obviously, which Brennan will talk about, is the financial exploitation aspect of it. They're targeting seniors at a high rate because they know that they either have a consistent income or own their own homes. Again, I like to say in Philadelphia, many of our seniors own their homes, and everyone who has been evicted or got out of jail or has some other issues, they somehow talk their way into our seniors' houses, and they never want to leave. They never want to pay any bills. So it's a very difficult environment that all our seniors are facing at this time. So, you know, how is this different again? You know, there are a lot of young victims of abuse out there, but how is it different with seniors? So statistics say that seniors are 3 times more likely to die in 3 years after mistreatment compared to other non-abused elders. And then again, because of the mistreatment, again, it's a higher risk of death and a higher risk of hospitalization. And as we know from representing anyone who's low income or on a fixed income, it's really hard to recoup some of the losses. So, you know, if a family member is stealing all the money out of your bank account, how are you going to pay for your medication or your food? You know, you're not, you know, my senior who's 85 is not going to be able to go back to work. And so, you know, how are they going to make ends meet? When I was doing bankruptcy work, I know that most of my seniors was really stressed about their $150 or $3,000 bill to Sears, and they stayed up late at night because of all the harassment from the bill collectors. So even though fraud is a defense to credit card collection, it doesn't stop many of these collectors from trying to intimidate our seniors into trying to make payments, even if they may not be responsible for the debts that were incurred. So
Yeah,
just very brief. Yep.
If I could just interrupt, this is Kelly. For attorneys on the webinar, I'm going to launch the first of the 2 question boxes. If you could please respond, you'll have 1 minute to do so. Thank you. And Leah, feel free to continue. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So just real briefly, because we do a lot of trainings to doctors. And so sadly, many of you already know this, there's only a few people that are mandatory reporters for elder abuse. So it is only administrators or people who are related to care homes where there's a large number of seniors. But, you know, doctors aren't mandatory reporters of elder abuse, and lots of other people aren't as well. So I found the statistics prior to doing a presentation for doctors that only 1 in 7,700 emergency department visits by seniors was actually diagnosed as elder abuse. And again, as we know, unfortunately elder abuse is pretty rampant and people are getting bruises and some other physical signs of elder abuse all the time, unfortunately it's not being diagnosed in our medical community. So we do try to educate our local medical community and professionals about trying to identify elder abuse. All right, so what kinds of stories are we seeing? We see lots of stories. Some of the stories are, Rose, who has been married for 30 years. All the assets are in the husband's name, and then she's been the caregiver for him because of his various illnesses. She generally doesn't call up with the police when he's abusive. Someone else calls for him. And then, she calls to talk to someone about a women's shelter. But, she doesn't want to leave because she doesn't want to be a burden on her children, and she doesn't want to go to a shelter because she doesn't want to be the oldest resident. So I will say, oftentimes in these scenarios, which we hear a lot of, 99% of the time, the senior is going to say, I don't want to go to a shelter. I don't want to be somewhere where, I'm the oldest resident. Again, the same is also very true for our LAP seniors who they really don't want to be in a situation where many of the other residents are English speaking, they're the only person, and they're going to feel even more isolated in a shelter. So again, we do talk about a lot of safety planning with our senior. It's similar to the safety planning that you may see with a younger victim, but again, all these other issues that I've sort of addressed in terms of, is the perpetrator still living in the home? Can you get the perpetrator out? What effect will moving the perpetrator have on the victim? So again, as I said, is the victim dependent on the perpetrator for care, or for going to the doctors, or for getting the medication? Is there anyone who can support the senior? Care dependency, those types of other things. In terms of, again, for seniors, we often say, don't assume that seniors have access to a phone and a cell phone. So as we know with the COVID-19, some counties, Philadelphia is doing remote hearings for PFAs, and they are scheduling them now. So a lot of our seniors only have a regular phone or a home phone, so they don't have the connectivity for that. I have a case in Montgomery County where I just got an order yesterday that basically said, well, the senior just has to either borrow a computer or go to your office because we're in the yellow phase, and we don't care that the senior may be at risk. Because of her health issues, she is at greater risk for COVID-19, so she wants to try to stay in her home as much as possible. And so the issues that we're seeing in terms of advocating for our seniors in terms of, participating in the court proceedings the best that they can. Again, when we think about seniors, just saying to a senior, well, can you go somewhere else? That doesn't always work. So if a senior is at a house and it's already been sort of retrofitted for them in terms of a wheelchair lift, any grab bars or anything like that, it's not easy to say to a senior, well, you need to go somewhere else. You need to go to a family member or a friend. As those of you who do housing know, landlords may agree to have the accommodation made in their new apartment, but they're not paying for it. So not only are you asking your senior to leave the house that they're currently in, but you're asking the senior then to try to figure out how to get the money to make these accommodations somewhere else. So again, it's just the idea of you have to think of, in terms of a younger victim, you often will say, can you pack a bag? So if you need to leave quickly, you can leave. That's, again, not a case for a senior who's in a wheelchair or uses a cane or has some other mobility issues where quickly is never an issue. Even if they don't have handicap issues, quickly is not something that they can do. So we'll often say, can you go to a safe room, and do you have access to a phone where you can call the police? And unfortunately, for some of our seniors, that's not the case. And so it could be pretty tricky for us to try to figure things out. All right, so again, we have lots of different kinds of cases. Next, we have Charles, 67, brought into the office at 4:30. As we know, I know when I worked at Legal Aid, we often, on Fridays, we'd have a senior come in or someone else come in at 4 o'clock on a Friday with an emergency, and then figuring out how we're going to deal with that. So he apologizes for his speech, saying he had a stroke a few months ago. His neighbor friend has been helping him, thinks his daughter's been stealing from him. He looks tired, his clothes is worn out. Can't remember his social security number, his household income, and seems confused. He can remember his home address and his deceased wife's name. And then he asked you if Alice can stay with you while you talk. So, obviously there's lots of issues here. We're going to try to unpack some of the issues, not all of them. So the first thing is, obviously it's 4:30. If he's feeling confused, may not be the best time to actually have a conversation with him. Brendan and I both know, because of personal experience, those who have dementia or Alzheimer's, there really is a sundowning effect. And so you never know when a client is coming in, whether or not this is a good time for them to get information. And obviously for us, and I think for most of you, you always want to speak with the client directly. So we often will have the children come in or some other person come in, the relative come in and say, well, they need me in there so that they, can remember everything that's being said. And I know that happens when people take their parents to the doctor. The issue here is obviously confidentiality. And the other issue is when you've done financial exploitation work all the time, unfortunately, you get a little jaded because you don't know who the perpetrator is. We've had many instances where it's actually the perpetrator coming in who wants to revoke and sign a new power of attorney because they want to use the money, the senior's money, for their own financial benefit. So I'm not going to go through this very specifically because of the time issue, but we also always have to be aware that the senior always has capacity. That's the presumption. The presumption is they always have capacity, and then it's the other side that needs to prove otherwise. And just because your senior is elderly or walks with a cane doesn't mean they have some sort of incapacity and they can't make their own decisions. I have 85-year-old seniors who are still riding around on SEPTA and sharp as a tack, and I have 60-year-old seniors who, have some other cognitive issues that in any given day they're better than others, and that's sort of the same thing. Any given day, your client may have a better capacity than others, and you have to sort of have an idea about that. We had helped with preparing this financial exploitation guide for older adults. I have put the link there for you to try to get it, but it really is a good breakdown to understand what your responsibility is and have an idea of what capacity a senior has to have, or anyone has to have, when they're making decisions. So someone who has to make a medical decision versus entering into a contract versus making a will, they're very different thresholds in terms of what kind of capacity that has to be done. I know when I worked at North Penn, we didn't use any specific protocol. So in the chat, if anyone in your agency has a specific protocol that you use, I will say there is no statutory reference to assess capacity in terms of a financial power of attorney, which is what most of you are probably doing for your clients. Obviously we often look at orientation to time and place to understand what the client is seeking. And as I said before, the burden of proof is on the person who's trying to challenge it. My colleagues probably remember that when I was working at North Penn, I had assessed the senior in terms of revoking a power of attorney that named 7 people as a co-agent. And for those of you who are dealing with an elderly person who have siblings, 7 people making a decision and making the same decision is probably not something that's going to happen. In our case, the senior revoked that power of attorney and executed a new power of attorney, and naming just 2 people as co-agents. The one oldest brother who was upset by this essentially filed a lawsuit against one of the co-agents, against the healthcare worker, not necessarily against me particularly, but again challenged the revocation and said that the client didn't have capacity. So there probably was a two-year litigation. I was deposed, and at the end of the day, the court found that the person challenging couldn't prove with independent evidence that the senior didn't have capacity at the time that she signed the document. So again, I don't know if any of you are looking at power of attorney documents now. We are not executing power of attorneys right now with COVID-19 unless there's a true emergency, only because obviously it's very difficult to make that assessment when you're working remotely. So if anyone is doing that and has good suggestions about that, certainly you can put that in the chat box. All right, so I'm gonna just finish this up real quickly. So again, in terms of your ethical responsibility, you have to essentially act normal. You have to just treat your senior like you would any other client and maintain normal client lawyer relations, except when you can't. So when it's clear that there's diminished capacity and substantial risk of physical harm, and the client can't act on his own, then you can take some steps for protective action, including a guardian if you believe that that's the appropriate thing. And again, the same thing in terms of information. So in order to talk to someone in terms of trying to get protective action, you're only allowed to reveal information to prevent reasonable certain death or substantial bodily harm. So that's a pretty high standard. So again, your duty is to still your client, even if you have concerns about their capacity. All right, so I'm going to actually turn it over to Brennan, and hopefully his audio is a little bit better. And he's going to tell you a little bit about sort of dealing with clients and focus more on financial exploitation issues. Thanks, Brennan.
Thanks, Leah. I'm getting a lot of echo, so you guys are okay? But okay, great. So one of the things I just wanted to preface this section about was how important it is, because we're looking at ethical obligations and concerns when we're representing older clients. Can you hear me? Yeah? Yeah, that's what you had too.
I can hear you.
I'm not sure.
They're okay, but for you and I are getting echo. So yeah, but everybody said they're okay in the chat room. So we're going to go ahead. So one of the things that's important in doing this work and considering your ethical obligations is to, understand sort of some of the preconceived notions that you would have. I think Leah touched on some of them, but I just wanted to also mention, for example, the myth is that most older folks who are scammed or go through financial exploitation, it's done by a stranger. Well, in fact, it's not true. Sadly, it's usually somebody that they know, if not somebody that they're related to. And also the fact that, it's people who have less experience in the world or are less savvy, maybe have less education, also not true. So I think those are important ethical considerations, because when you're looking at capacity and you're looking at things, it's very easy to sort of make decisions that you don't even realize you're making. You need to remain open. As Leah said, it's a fluid situation, particularly when you're working with older folks, and it's a spectrum, right? So everyone's going to fall differently and do different on different days. And it's not necessarily age-related. So we're looking at, Leah, do you move the slides, or I got them? Okay, great. So we're looking at, let's say Charles as an example. These are some of the things that you want to always keep in mind, which is obviously to interview the client alone and as soon as possible after the incident. Again, this is going to be a big challenge because it's very common. I'd like my daughter to be with me. I'd like my son to be with me. I'd like my next door neighbor to be with me, my pastor to be with me. All of these things are possible, and I've heard them all. And I am unfortunately going to have to agree with Leah that you do become jaded. You never know who is actually doing what when it comes to this sort of exploitation. So you have to take it very, very slowly and build the trust with the client. One of the ways you can do that is to make sure that you're in a physically comfortable, safe location, that you're taking breaks, that you're reading body language, and that you are accommodating any kind of changes. Leah had mentioned the sundowning effect. If anyone doesn't know what that is, it's a phenomenon where folks who live with some form of dementia, depending on the stage and its intensity, may experience an increased agitation or an increased loss of memory or sense of place or orientation at the end of the day, or literally as the sun is going down. So that's something to be aware of. That can also come off that the person is becoming, non-cooperative or even some type of slurred speech. So there's many different ways that can
can manifest, and it's an important thing to think about when you're working with an older population. Also, of course, interpretation needs, and we try not to attorney shop, as most places do. We try not to have clients saying, I want this one, I want that one. But there are situations, particularly in dealing with domestic violence and abuse and exploitation, where depending on the gender of the client, they may be really uncomfortable speaking to an attorney of a certain gender. So that's another thing to think about. Go ahead. So this is sort of, what are we talking about here? Again, I would caution people to not think that they know what it is. It's probably a lot bigger than you think it is, and it's probably a lot more subtle than you think it is. This is the definition there. Everyone can read it for themselves, but you're talking about everything from, a family member, an adult child who says, you know what, mom, dad, grandma, you better give me the house, otherwise you're going to lose it, because the government will take it, or this or that, to, the variations of the nefarious gift card scams, which we see a lot of, right? And these folks are very good at what they do. So it's much more widespread. People don't like to talk about it because they feel ashamed, as they do often with any kind of abuse. So looking at identity theft, unauthorized withdrawals, abuse of fiduciary status, credit card fraud, which is difficult because, as Leah sort of alluded to, the credit card companies are going to take the position, well, you authorized this, right? Because the client has developed a relationship with somebody who they believe is in Florida or in Canada or in South Africa or in Nicaragua or in Germany or wherever it may be, and all of those places have come up, and believes they're talking to somebody who they've become friends with, and they're sending money to help with a sick child or a sick relative. So the credit card's going to say, there was no gun to the head, so to speak. So, too bad. But we do try to fight that as much as possible. Fraudulent deed transfers, of course, reverse mortgage scams, contractor fraud. We do see a lot of that. Unfortunately, in those cases can become protracted. I'm in one right now that's been going on for a long time, and there's money involved. There are damages, but I think the issue for the client is also the sense of outrage and wanting to be heard, right? That don't dismiss me because you think I'm old or foolish or whatever. You committed a fraud, and so that's something we do see a lot of, unfortunately. And then, of course, the scams, grandparent scam, the dating scams are another one that come up a lot. Again, people have a lot of preconceived notions, but I can tell you people 60 and older are humans, and they engage in all kinds of daily activities of living, and they have relationships, and many of them are more savvy with technology than you might think. Not all, but many of them are. So this can be a very wide gamut, and these scams can interweave, right? So they can start as a dating scam and then turn into a deed transfer. So, of course, now we are dealing with all kinds of extra risk, and, necessity being the mother of invention. These scam artists, swindlers are very good at what they do, and they're using this to their advantage. If you've got any scams, please put them in the chat box. We are looking to collect them. This is something that we do. When we have partners that we work with in law enforcement and other types of agencies. So we're trying to identify early on, as quickly as we can, the type of scam that's happening. It's almost, if you'll excuse the reference, it's almost like a virus, because it'll pop up, right, and it'll spread, right? And so we're trying to practice all of those things and get ahead of it before it gets out there. Lots of things now with PPEs, we're calling you up and saying, there's a vaccine you may not have heard of, but because you're an XYZ program, you qualify. You just have to go to Walmart and get a $500 gift card. This may sound ridiculous, but you'd be surprised. Never think that you're too smart to fall for these scams, because they can happen to anybody. You're talking about forgiveness of loans, right? Many people over 60, increasingly so, and this will be the case, have still very heavy burdens of student loans. So you're talking about things like that. unsolicited text messages. It could be anything. Could be somebody pretending to be someone that they know, or this is your friend Joe from high school. Do you remember me? I can't believe it. All these years. Listen, I'm in a hard place. Or it could be a job opportunity. Lots of different things like that. And I'm repeating it, but I cannot stress enough. These people are very, very good at what they do. They're very good. Unfortunately, often the point of contact that our clients have is probably a very, very low hanging fruit on the tree, right? This is basically corporate. I mean, it's a business. Fraud, exploitation. It's a worldwide, global meta economy. And so, it's a nightmare to try to track down the person. And as I said, the person that our client is actually probably talking to may be in a very bad situation themselves. Maybe literally they also be in some kind of enforced situation where they're, being forced to make these calls or do things. So it gets very complicated. It's not as easy as, well, Joe called from Florida, and he said his name was Smith, so we can find him. Sometimes, but not always. So do please let us know if you've heard of any scams in the box. I don't see anything there. And going on. So what kinds of, what's the immediate action? Right? What's the first aid? What should you do immediately when you're facing these kinds of things? So of course, always file a report. And everyone has an opinion on this. You have to encourage your client to file the report. What happens from there is something they can't control. The police won't take it. The police didn't give it to me. They didn't come out. They did take it. They didn't believe me. They said I would. Whatever it may be, we need the report, right? We need the DC or the incident number so we can preserve any kind of VCAT, victim compensation assistance program. You want to stop the bleeding, so to speak. So you want to notify the bank immediately or any other institutions that are holding any kind of financial assets for the client, so sort of just stop everything. Let Social Security know. Those of you who practice in that area, I did quite a bit of that work. They have their own. They've got the infamous 1696, which something's happening with now. So that's another sort of avenue you have to go through. And as you know, also probably know, they don't recognize financial powers of attorney. They have their own appointed representative form. So you have to make sure that that's being dealt with, because that's a place where you can easily miss, right? You think, well, has anybody been touching your Social Security? No, it's coming every month. But meanwhile, unbeknownst to you, because you didn't think to ask, or the client didn't think to know, it's actually going to a bad actor, a relation or not. Change all of the debt payment. You can do things you would do in litigation generally, sort of building your case. You're going to keep your facts and your evidence. Not easy to do, and not easy for anyone to do at any age. If you've been on one of those, thanks for calling. Your call's important to us. 12 hours later. We do provide services with our wonderful legal advocates who actually help our clients go through that system. And that's important. Revoking the power of attorney, if that's necessary, obviously also important. Okay, so I think we did all of these things. Yeah, I mentioned this before. I'm sure you're familiar with this if you've worked in family law in general or in any kind of domestic relations areas. These are people's lives and these are people's relationships. So it's intense. There's a lot of shame people feel. They feel, oh, I can't believe I was so stupid, or I can't believe so-and-so did this to me. I think that's important as a practitioner to keep in mind, that it could be you, it could be anybody. It takes a lot for people to come forward. And then even when they do come forward, they do tend to hold things back. So that's an important thing. You can read through these yourself, lots of the sense of like, I don't want anyone to get in trouble. This is, as Leah said, I was in court this morning dealing with a situation like this, right? And nobody wins, right? It's a very sad situation. The parents are quite a bit older, and they have a 19 and a 15-year-old son. So one of them is in their 80s and one is in their 70s, the parents. And they're having a lot of difficulty with the older son. And, so on the one hand, they're calling you, get him out, he's done this, he's done that. On the other hand, they're saying, we don't want him to be in trouble. We don't want him to go to jail. We don't want to destroy his future. So that can be difficult. That's a case of physical abuse and emotional abuse, but it goes the same for financial exploitation, because I've had those cases as well where it was the adult child who was doing it. So you're looking about, opening new accounts. Basically, you want to erase any access or block any access that the bad actor had, whether it's a known bad actor or not. So you just sort of get in there immediately. These are the first things you're going to do. Boom, boom, boom. Close all of the access to the funds and get everything into a safe place so that you can prevent further exploitation, at least at the moment. And those are challenging steps, okay? So here's a case study. 79 years old, lives in another state. His family lives in another state, so he's isolated. Most of his friends have died. But he has a girlfriend in his 30s. Again, these are not outrageous examples. This happens much more than people might think. I've got several clients who have intergenerational relationships. And they've invited, he's invited her to live after a few months. She didn't have anywhere to go. She's got 2 school-aged children. He's gotten very close to them. Everything's sort of going along. He doesn't mind helping out, right? Because this is a new relationship. He's very excited. Things are going well, but then he starts to realize the credit card, balance is going up and there's overdrawn, there's, drafts are being charged for overdrawn things and he can't sleep, So he asks, she sort of ridicules him, right? She doesn't really threaten him. And then they get into an argument, which is not uncommon, and it's not a physical altercation, but clearly there's something wrong here, and he tells her to get out of the house. And this is, again, not, it's a hypothetical based on reality. So she calls the police and says that he pushed her. And they make a report. They don't arrest him, and then they tell her to get a PFA. So, yes, this is stuff that happens. So I don't know if anybody has any idea about how they might handle that. In the box, you can put some things if you have questions about that. So the main place, not the only, but the main place you're going to address financial exploitation, particularly with fiduciary duties, is going to be in the orphans court division of courts of common pleas, the civil court. So, and that also has to do with any kind of guardianship matter where there may be some abuse or financial exploitation on the part of the guardian. Some of the actions that I mentioned that we do take are the protection from abuse petitions. And again, we won't belabor it. The statute, if you're not familiar with it, is worth a read because it's tricky. On first blush, it looks like you have to have physical abuse, but there is an argument to be made if the facts support it that if the person is in reasonable fear of imminent harm, right, that may rise to that level. Not always, depends, right? So no, she didn't really push me, but she had a knife in her hand and said, if you don't give me your money, or I'm going to cut your throat in your sleep. And again, I'm not trying to be graphic or dramatic. These are things that people say to each other. That's a good argument, I think, right? But usually you do have to have physical abuse. It's going to depend on the judge. Ejaculate, these could be grandkids, could be strangers. We had a neighbor whose house burnt down, a client where a neighbor's house burnt down, and out of the goodness of his heart, and he's known this person for a long time on the street, where they lived. She moved in. Turns out she actually had set her house on fire, was being investigated for arson, and became ill. She refused to leave, and she destroyed his home. It's now being condemned. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get to this case in time. It was already sort of too late. That would have been an action in ejectment, right, to remove her from the home. She had no right to be there per se, but she had been living there and she had established residence and she was there at his invitation. Torts are something that under our VOCA funding, Victims of Crime Assistance Act funding, we cannot actually pursue in terms of direct representation, but that doesn't mean the client can't, and you certainly have the obligation ethically to advise them of that, right? And the torts are just as infinite as you can imagine. These are just some of the basic ones. Conversion fraud, breach of fiduciary, undue influence, all of these kinds of things. And sometimes that may be actually a much better way, depending on who you're going after, right? Or who the client's going after for them to recoup some damages. Orphans court, obviously, you'd be dealing with the guardianships. And demand for accounting is a big one. So something that doesn't quite seem right, right? Senior comes to you and says, well, you know, my daughter has always taken care of everything for me, and I trust her with my life. Okay, you know, but I looked at my bank account yesterday, you know, I had X and now I have X minus, you know, 5,000. And I asked her about it and she won't tell me, you know. So we don't know. We don't know what the facts are, right? So maybe it's just there's been some confusion. We don't know. We don't presume that there's wrongdoing. But if a good faith, you know, request to the daughter, hey, where's this money gone, or what's happening with that money or this credit card, is rebuffed or ignored, and I've been on the receiving end of those, you know, there may be a time to file a demand for an accounting, right? Which is to sort of have the court step in and say, you know what, you need to provide information about where this is going. Okay. Those are some of the other remedies. So again, what makes it different, right? Just because a person is 60 or older? Well, it depends. It depends on lots of different things. But some of the things you would consider, that we have to consider every day, is preservation of the evidence, which is always important in litigation, but particularly here, because I didn't have it, I forgot where I put it, I'm not sure where it is, wherever it may be. And then there's the danger of delay. If your client is frail, talking about restitution, seizure of assets, there's capacity. I mean, we could do an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours in capacity. I'm sure everyone has got a story with it. You know, it's something you have to be very careful with. And it is hard, as Leah said, to navigate that from a remote stance. It's often, I prefer to meet with a client face to face. You're going to find also that your prejudice in society extends right through the old courtroom. Oh, that old lady, that old guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's crazy. He, you know. Yeah, so it's amazing. And sometimes it's the pot calling the kettle from the other side of the bench. So there's an assumption if they have dementia, well, they can't testify, they're unreliable. Well, that's not true, right? And there is evidence to prove, as you can see there, that some evidence is actually indicating that even with dementia, there's a very strong escalation in terms of the ability to recall traumatic events as compared to non-traumatic events. Okay, so and going forward. More things that I think everybody would think of, but just bears repeating in case you have to establish the case circumstantially. You're going to be using medical and financial records. Anyone who's worked Social Security law knows that that's sort of bread and butter of a case. That's really where you build the cases on the record. Family, friends, what were the relationships, what was going on before the exploitation happened, and there's the corroborating evidence. So we do get a lot of, unfortunately, well, I gave my son the money to hold to protect from me because I was afraid I would, I didn't want to just leave it in the bank, so I gave it to him, and he put it in his bank account to take care of it. But I asked him now for it, and it's gone. That was actually the case, and there we had difficulty reconstructing it. I believed the client. There was no reason not to believe the client, but there was no paper trail, and she couldn't provide one. So that's definitely something you want to look at right away and get on right away. When even the hint of exploitation comes up, you want to start asking about records. Do you have any records here? Do you have any records now? Where can we get the records? Who holds the records? That kind of thing. Some of the assets that you can use to preserve, some of the tools you can use to preserve assets in terms of litigation. I think everyone may be familiar with them, so they're all there. I'm not going to go read them. National Elder Fraud Hotline. This makes me think of something to say too. It may seem like just throwing water in the ocean, but we always urge our clients to file a complaint with the FTC. Always, which is, again, not a fun process or a particularly easy one. And will anything happen? Probably not. But we do believe, we're committed to the notion that information about these kinds of things is going to lead to greater awareness and hopefully to more resources to prevent and investigate them. So the FTC does accept these kinds of complaints, and so we will always tell the client to please make a complaint to the FTC, and again, our advocates may help them. And this is the National Fraud Hotline through the DOJ, so that'll be in the materials when we send them out.
So the only reason, sorry, Brennan, if you
No, go ahead.
The only reason I added this slide is because this is obviously a new hotline. It just started on March 3rd. And one of the things they do is they'll assist the senior with these types of things. So helping with the filing a complaint with the FTC and making sure people get to the right resources. So in legal aid, we know that we're so busy, we can't do some of these other social services things. We are lucky at SeniorLAW Center. We have some legal advocates that may be able to help with that. But again, here's something available for you that, yeah, you can't deal with the client right away, but you say, okay, call the hotline and they'll help you do the steps so that you preserve some of the claims that we've already talked about. So I know we're out of time. We wanted to thank Plan again for hosting us. Our information is available. So if you ever need some advice about cases, again, we're not trying to say we're experts, but we deal with these cases every day. So we may have some different views that may assist you in your cases. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you both very much, and everyone have a great day.